Hello, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of the day. It's my absolute pleasure to moderate today's discussion with our three amazing panelists. Later, you will see a QR code. Through the app, you'll be able to ask the questions directly to our panelists, and I'll do my best to ask them while we have this discussion. Sounds good? OK. Before introducing you, so why are we here today? We're going to talk about collaboration and successful exits. So one way to scale for deep tech startups is to find the right relevant, the right partnership for them to grow with investors that know the specificities about the emerging technologies, with CVCs that have also the potential for market access for the startups, among many other things. So the thing is that how do we align incentives for the right win-win collaboration partnerships that would lead to successful exits, right? And how do we make sure that we preserve the startup's DNA? We'll talk about that, navigating through acquisitions or any other types of exit for the startup. So to discuss these and more, I have the pleasure to be with today three amazing panelists. So each will bring a distinct point of view, a distinct perspective and experience. A CVC, Matt Jones, thank you so much for being here, manager partner at ScienceCo Ventures. ScienceCo, a big supporter of Hello Tomorrow Summit. VC, Max Bautin, you told me, managing partner and co-founder at IQ Capital. Thank you so much as well. And an entrepreneur, Karim Beguir, co-founder and CEO at InstaDeep, and we'll know a bit more about your journey, right? Thank you so much. Thank you for them. So let's dive into this discussion. I think I'm going to start with you, Karim. So I'd love to understand, better your journey towards what happened to InstaDeep, which is acquisition with BioNTech. But let's maybe first focus on the challenges that you faced. What were the main risks you see in this discussion, this advanced discussion with BioNTech? You want to start with that?
Sure, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Vincent. Hi, everyone. So, challenges. When you're an entrepreneur, there are lots of challenges. And in particular, like deep tech is not the easiest part of entrepreneurship because you both, as an entrepreneur, have to invent a business model. But in the case of deep tech, you also have to invent the technology on top. So there is a scientific challenge overlaid on a business challenge, which makes things extremely hard. And so my advice is and that's the main challenge, is how you keep momentum. At the end of the day, momentum is the fire that drives a startup forward. It's what helps you stay ahead of the game in terms of fundraising, later on strategic negotiations, but also keep the best employees in your company, the top talents, keep the investors happy, and so on and so forth. So really, the biggest challenge is how do you constantly reinvent yourself to keep the momentum going. And I can share perhaps something that I found very interesting in the life of InstaDeep. So InstaDeep, I started the project as a bootstrap in Africa. So doing an AI deep tech startup in Africa was crazy 10 years ago, but I was passionate about it and I felt this was something important, building a company between the developing world and the developed world. And we went from one step to another. And what's interesting is literally every 18 months, the company had gone through a complete exponential cycle, which means if you look at what it was 18 months ago, it's completely different. And in a good scenario, the team is stronger, the product proposition and value proposition is stronger, and you have new opportunities you only dreamed of. And the funny thing was to start as a bootstrap. So we started literally with $2,000, 2 laptops, and it was fascinating how every 18 months it felt like a new project. But the main challenge, to answer your question, Vincent, is the momentum and how you keep it, and that is tough. You have to constantly be sort of like thinking about the company forward while managing the fires that you have in front of you every day, and that's not for the faint-hearted. So, you know, you have to be passionate about what you do. You have to believe in what you do to a point where it's almost like more than a project. And for me and for my co-founder Zora, this was more than a project. This was a mission. We wanted to prove that deep tech innovation between Europe and Africa was possible, and we went ahead step by step all across this process. And today, InstaDeep is a part of BioNTech Group. We closed the acquisition a year and a half ago in July 2023, and we have 450 talents, engineers, researchers, experts in high-performance computing, working with BioNTech, but also outside BioNTech as an operationally independent company.
Nice, nice. And I wanted to ask, before going to you, Matt, with a question, did you at some point, while talking with BioNTech, you know, fear about losing your identity, what makes you special, and winning?
So that's an important question when you're facing like strategic negotiations like this. In our particular case, we actually knew the BioNTech leadership and the BioNTech team very well. We were actually working together. They were one of our top partners and customers since 2019. So it didn't feel that way. And like we knew each other. We were already working together for like 3-4 years, successful projects, like dozens of projects. And I think that's an important point. As a founder, if you have strategic conversations, you really need to feel what you're getting yourself into. And in this particular case, I would say this was easier than most cases because we actually knew each other and respected each other very much and knew that this was really additive.
Thanks. And Matt, we know, going to you, so I think that at ScienceCo you haven't yet acquired startup per se, but you've been collaborating, working with these deep tech startups. What do you think are the biggest challenges you see working with them? And how did you make sure that you align, you know, the innovation, but you still want to make sure that there is a strategic fit with what you're doing at ScienceCo? Is that, you know, something that you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. In terms of momentum, we have entrepreneurs and founders who have that vision and they really bring that, but you also need resources. So when I think about that as both an investor in company and a partner using my corporation as collaboration, it's how do you continue that momentum by having those resources? And whether you're fundraising a Series A or a seed or you're doing a commercial arrangement with a corporation, it's about that alignment. Whether it's the alignment with the financial investors about what milestones you're going to hit, or it's about that alignment with the corporation and what they can bring to help keep that momentum going. I think the biggest challenge is making sure that you're aligned, just like what you said, whether it's a financial investor or corporate, that you both have the same motivation and you're both on the same side of the table. And that can be everything from ownership, that can be control, that can be just timeline. And I think that's the biggest thing you hear, whether it's a corporate that is investing or it's a corporate that you're partnering with who's going to be your customer or vendor, it's can you align on those timelines with them? So I think that's always the big question, both from the corporate's perspective, can we move at the speed of the startup, but also will the startup move at a speed and be there when we need it as well? Because startups also need to scale at some time to be successful, and so we have that same challenge on that side with them.
Thank you. Going to you, Max, from your experience, do you see some very, like the biggest mistakes you see startups making when they engage with investors, or more specifically when they engage with IQ Capital? You know, what can you tell us about that? Do you have examples of startups making these kind of mistakes? And so let's deep dive into a bit insight for the entrepreneurs in the room here. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if I look at it through the context of mistakes that actually derail potential exits, and answer it in that context, I think you know there are a few things that startups do need to be aware of. With the financial-driven VCs per se directly, there are fewer things that can go wrong because even if a VC does end up owning a disproportional part of a company, an acquirer typically doesn't really see that as a barrier, actually many founders don't really realize it, but a lot of the time the historic arrangements in terms of ownership do get rehashed by the acquirer, who says, well, that's wonderful, and 40% of my acquisition budget is going to be paid to the team post-acquisition as incentive bonus. I have certainly seen that. So the other thing to bear in mind is that I think with CVCs as co-investors, which is, I think in the US last year, 56% of all funding rounds by value had a CVC co-investor. So it's a very positive force for a lot of companies, because it brings capital, but it also opens up a lot of collaboration. It opens up a lot of doors there. And ultimately, in 25 M&A exits that we have had, both to the largest players in the US and Europe and in Asia, it never happened without an existing collaboration, typically a customer type of relationship. So that's kind of a path that you go to. But you do want to ensure that that those interests are well balanced, because CVCs sometimes bring more than just commercial interest to the table. And again, actually, one thing that people don't necessarily realize is that only 2% of all CVC investments end up with an acquisition in the last 10 years. So it's actually a very, very small percentage, and people often are concerned about it. But I think the bigger mistake, the bigger concern is what the rest of the ecosystem might have with a particular corporate being what could be perceived as too strategically overbearing. So whether through the commercial arrangements on sales or distribution or very high ownership. So we always say that it's typically better to have 2 or 3 corporate partners of that nature, so because it naturally balances things out. You know, I do have a few anecdotes that I may save for later, but you know, there are lots of things that can go somewhat wrong, but at the same time, there are strategies to ensure that they don't become that much of a risk.
We'll go back to that then. Okay, thanks. Going back to you, Karim, I'd love for you to tell us a bit about how it went with BioNTech. So basically, I guess that BioNTech offer was not the first or the only you received. What made you think, okay, that makes sense here. That's the right time. These are the right partners for us. And you know, how do you? So that's one part of the question. But I'd love to understand more specifically, for InstaDeep with BioNTech, how did you maintain your culture, your autonomy? Understand that you're not fully part of BioNTech, like you kept the brand, you kept the product. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. I think it was indeed we had first several acquisition offers before BioNTech, and the key thing was for us and why we decided to partner with our BioNTech colleagues was really like, does it fundamentally add value? And when you're looking, I mean, I think something that is extremely important as an entrepreneur is you have to be useful to society. If you want ultimately to be successful, you have to measure that by how much value you're providing to others. And others, of course, your clients, your partners, your investors, but also the ecosystem at large. And so previous offers we got felt very financial, not an obvious progress. With BioNTech, I think the fact that we were working together for many years, that created already sort of like a bond, a culture of collaboration, trust. That was like good start. But we also saw the potential. And I think this is an extraordinary time in AI. And it's all about like, how can you push AI applications that make the world a better place? The BioNTech team is working on helping solve cancer. That's a big topic with personalized cancer vaccines and the like. This really felt compelling. And when you look at the mission of InstaDeep, InstaDeep's mission is to build AI to benefit everyone. And so in many ways, it was a continuation of our mission. We felt we could have actually a bigger impact, and that was a good thing. Now to the second part of your question, Vincent, which is about keeping the culture of your startup. I really think that you need to see what makes sense. For me, there are probably like two potential paths if you're getting acquired. One is to really remain operationally independent, keep your brand, culture, etc., or one to be fully absorbed. I think both have their merits, and it's all about like what does make the most sense and what's the deal and the agreement you have with your partners. And in the case of InstaDeep, InstaDeep is a leader in AI. We're one of the very few companies in the world that can innovate. We have 25, 30 research papers per year, but also deploy in practice. And so it makes sense from that point of view to keep it as sort of an operationally independent AI arm to continue to attract the best talents and continue to work on really pushing the state-of-the-art forward. And so in the case of InstaDeep, it made sense, but I want to emphasize this is not necessarily the case every time. But halfway doesn't work usually. It's either like full absorption or operationally independent, and you have your owner and partner with whom you work.
Thanks. And Max, I'd love to hear about that, because how do you ensure that startups, they don't become overly dependent on one corporate? I guess that may happen. I'd love to know from your perspective, any opportunity for an exit, for instance. Is that a plus? Is that a hindrance to be very well connected with one specific corporate? Do you see that often? Can you tell us about that with the mic very close to your chin?
Yes. I think over dependence on one particular partner is, genuinely speaking, always a danger, because be it in purely commercial relationships, if 50 or even a third of your revenue is coming from one customer, it's always seen as too much concentration. But the complexity when you also accept investment from one of your corporate partners is that if they are a significant shareholder, if they're present on the board, it also matters whether a CVC actually has a formal CVC unit which is remunerated like a VC unit would be, or is that part of the kind of corporate structure where the same person is both wearing two hats, as an investor and as a commercial partner. We have seen some conflicts happen on that end, but ultimately it's just a task for the startup. It does become easier to attract another corporate investor once you have interest from one, and why not go and proactively secure support from more than one party, and to really think about balancing and not letting over reliance, because it doesn't happen as much these days, because I think a lot of the market has learned to operate as good citizens. But 10, 15 years ago, there were some super high-profile cases where, well, Love Film, it was one example where a corporate partner blocked an acquisition, and then bought the same company for a third of the price that was on the table. I mean, people don't really think about some of these consent rights and exactly what controls they give, but you have to be much more careful when there are multiple potential for a conflict of interest, let's put it this way.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to jump in on this as well, because I think a lot has changed in the corporate venture capital world over that last 15 years. And I come from a background of doing financial VC. I just happen to have a thesis that corporates and startups can accelerate change. And so I think as entrepreneurs out there, as startups, as co-investors, we do due diligence on the teams. They should do due diligence on us. You should know your investor. You should know your corporate investor. And when you think about that acceleration that a corporate can bring, you have to weigh that against, well, am I partnering with somebody? Does that mean I can't partner with somebody else? I love examples. One in our own portfolio, a company had a self-healing micro material that could be put into anything. They were really focused on paint. So think about self-healing paint. We're a polymer company. We came to them saying, hey, maybe we could accelerate you into a whole new vertical. So let's partner with you there. That was an acceleration. The startup, you probably hear this all the time. You've got to focus, 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 do one thing really well. And so I think you really have to think about, again, whether it's raising capital or doing a partnership with a corporation, is that a means to an end? And at the same time, we invest really early stage. We're okay doing seed stage deals. And this goes to diversification. We're okay taking technical risk, but that also means not everything's going to work out. So that same company I talked about, we worked on it. We found out that the performance was good, but not great. And if it's not great, it's not a venture deal anymore. And that was great learning for us as a corporate, but it was also great learning for the startup, because then they could take that knowledge and say, okay, let's double down on this market over here. So it gave diversification and portfolio management to the startup, but it also helped us as a corporate in an effective way.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, I do agree, and the thing is that it's great to see how much the corporate world in that sense has changed, because the fundamentals are still there. The vast majority, 99% of all VC exits is M&A. You can't do M&A without a well-established corporate relationship, and in particular in deep tech, having solid relationships, aligned relationships with your core customers is super helpful, because the impact of door opening, of support, of pointing in the right direction, of also introducing to some other partners within the ecosystem of the same corporate is invaluable. And the investment, by the way, is also a very it's not always super massive in terms of check sizes, but it does send a lot of the positive signals to the rest of the financial world. So I think we have found a much healthier coexistence path, and it's incredibly positive.
Going back to you, Karim, so for startups, there are many ways to, as exits, you have acquisition of IPO, you can continue growth and continue growing. Do you have any advice maybe to give founders here today in how to navigate these decisions and how you take this decision to continue or not?
Yeah, you have to be flexible. You have to be sort of like exploring every path with an open mind, and at the same time trying not to slow down. I think an aspect we haven't discussed yet on this panel, but which is really important, and that was a key learning for me, was already like, for example, like fundraisers take always way more time than you think. That's number one. And they can slow your momentum sometimes. And it's even more true for M&A or strategic discussions. So this means that if you are having these discussions, you need to do it in a structured way such that it doesn't completely absorb you. And it's like, you need to be close to the event horizon, but not past the line. So perhaps a part of the team is dedicated to this strategic conversation, but another part of the team, and you as a CEO, another part of yourself, is also focused on pushing, getting new customers, keeping the momentum going. Because the moment you slow down, you're not doing anybody a favor. And even your acquirer, he wants people who are dynamic, who are pushing, etc. And these conversations can sometimes take a very long time. So you have to explore, but at the same time keep the integrity of the company and never slow down, in a sense. That's sometimes a real challenge, because if you're a small company and perhaps you don't have a lot of people who have M&A experience, in our case, my CFO actually turned out to have amazing M&A experience. That was fantastic, because she could field calls with lawyers, and the complexity of these things is absolutely insane, by the way. And at the same time, we kept pushing forward. And it's very important you should not get into, I have to do this deal at any cost. If you start thinking like this, it's not going to happen. You have to always think, how can I keep adding value? How can I keep, like, InstaDeep or my company, like, being super interesting, valuable? I'm still fighting for talent on all fronts. I'm fighting for new customers on front. They have that mindset. And so it's easier said than done. You have to compartmentalize and keep going.
Yeah, so basically you need to make a choice to enter these discussions And if it means stopping the business as usual, what you've been doing and innovation.
There is a real cost into getting into a serious conversation. So, of course, you should get into that conversation if you feel the value is there. But in any case, you should be really mindful that this is going to have an impact on your business, and it's going to be a decelerator for all the other things going on. It's actually true also for fundraisers, and some learnings really, like, these things take always much longer than you think. So if you're raising capital, it better be for a good reason, or otherwise just keep going with the capital you have until next time. So that's the spirit, and keep in mind that time factor, because I've consistently underestimated it personally, and I'm not the only one. Yeah.
And actually, to add a couple of things to that, from the things that I have seen as challenges. One needs to understand that once you enter into the M&A discussion river, it does start to have its own life. Because as the entrepreneur, as the CEO, you might have one perspective on it and realize that maybe it's not the right direction, but one needs to also be acutely aware that there's the rest of the team. And the moment that people start to smell a bit of money in the air, the behavior does change. And in the team at large, and even if you're trying to keep it to the top 5 people in the management team, it does have a momentum of its own. And once you start it, it can be hard to stop. I've certainly seen at least one situation where it's gone so far with the investors, with the team members, with the just overall momentum, and then the corporate changed. Slightly, they know what they're doing. They've bought a lot of companies, and at the 11th hour they said, okay, we'll reduce the price by 25%. And at that point, the founder didn't want to sell. But the point is that it's just too hard to stop that momentum. And the costs as well, the overheads of a transaction by that time, you're talking typically several million of dollars of overheads alone. So, that it's a very, very... It's a story that one needs to put a lot of thinking before you really put it on rails to actually go into the transaction.
I totally agree with Max, and this is why, like, the first acquisition offers that we got, I turned them down immediately. Like, we didn't waste time on it. If it didn't feel right, was not worth it. And for the one we went ahead, yes, we knew what we were doing, in the sense that, yes, this was serious enough that we could take the risk of giving it serious attention.
Yeah, and Matt, this idea of timeline and very different pace between a startup looking for partnership, for clients, for funding, you see that. What do you maybe put in place at Syensqo Ventures to ensure that you answer as fast as possible, on point for the startups, meeting their needs, and maybe say no quickly? Is it something that I guess you get this kind of feedback and? Yeah, can you tell us about that?
I mean, it is, and that's where corporates, we're out there, we have a day job, we are growing our own revenue, we're doing our own business, and it has to fit within our timeline as well. So just like in fundraising, it's all about timing, it's all about making sure you have lots of conversations going on, because you can't rely on any one group. My recommendation, though, is you have to drive a process and you have to hold the corporates accountable. Don't feel shy about putting forward a Gantt chart and making sure you have the business relationships. So I see my role as the investor in startups to try and communicate between the two, or translate between the two. I come at it from an equity perspective. I'm on the same side of the table as the entrepreneur, so I also want to hold my corporate accountable. So I think you have to really make those strong personal relationships and leverage those to make sure that the progress is going. But again, like I said in my last example, not everything's going to be successful. So you also want corporates who will then stay involved with that company. You don't want them to exit either. So I think you need to look for people who have a long-term vision, and even if it doesn't work out on that one project, they're going to continue to support the company going forward.
Thank you. And Syensqo is very strong on technology, and that's, I guess, one of the main ways you look at a startup, potential acquisition or collaboration. What do you look also in a startup, in a potential target for potential collaboration? What's important as well when you enter in these kind of deep discussions with the entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Well, actually, our filter is we want to develop either our suppliers of the future or our customers of the future. My model is not to say I'm going to go acquire the startup that I partner with. I want to be working with them such that we can collectively go create a new breakthrough. That their success is our success. Either I buy a lot of materials from them and put my value out on top and then take it to my customers, or vice versa. The startup becomes successful with their application, but that application depends on our materials. So the way that I look at it is I want that startup to be successful. I'll do whatever I can to do that. I'm in the risk diversification business, so I don't want all the eggs in one basket because there can be delays, there can be changes, just like there is with companies if you don't have an equity relationship with them. So I think it goes back to, again, you as entrepreneurs, whether you're talking to a financial VC, an impact investor, a corporate investor, is really make sure you have that alignment with the vision of the founder and everyone's clear going in up front, what are the expectations? If you're dealing with a corporate who says, look, I really want to acquire you in the future, great, put that out there on the table and make sure with your advisors, your board, your other co-founders, your other investors, that is something you know going in up front. But really it is do your diligence. And I think the same thing on the corporate side. We have to be upfront with the startups. Here's our main goal. This is what we're trying to do. Anything that we do should stand on its own as a separate commercial agreement. And the equity should be something that's an accelerator that helps us, help the startup be successful.
And Karim, you're not just you're an entrepreneur, but you're also, part of an ecosystem of many startups and scale-ups. So you see how they engage with investors and corporates. Do you see any maybe pitfalls or mistakes you've seen around, some examples maybe, but that you've seen around from startups, from entrepreneurs in negotiation with investors? Is that something?
I think like a clear learning for me is as an entrepreneur, you should really be, like it's funny to say this, but you should really be passionate about the mission, and there are no shortcuts. You should not be money driven, for example. So typical mistakes I've seen, people really like getting crazy about valuations, for example, and perhaps onboarding the wrong investor just because the valuation is more attractive. Mm-hmm. And that's the advice I give to entrepreneurs, and really like it's a pleasure to meet them and sort of like share our experience at InstaDeep, is really like be focused on, like there is no shortcut, just do what really needs to be done. And ultimately, success will find you, but do not be obsessed about it. It takes a very specific mindset. So one way to see it is like, try to be helpful and useful and valuable to all your partners, and do not worry about how things will play out. There will always be a way as long as you're providing value. That's the key thing. And so don't be short-term greedy in any way. Really focus on building the business. And for us, this was really like an extraordinary adventure. If you had asked me in the beginning what could happen and what actually happened, I would say absolutely impossible. But if you're in it for the right reasons, this kind of like crazy success stories can be possible. And for me, that was actually the biggest surprise of all this. And so really like build it for the real reasons and try to be helpful. Yeah.
Thanks. Max, do you want to add something? Do you want to add the VC perspectives on these kind of pitfalls we talked about?
I think I would probably focus more on the kind of mistakes during the exit process per se, rather than taking the VC money on board, because fundamentally that's the number one thing. Just focusing on getting the right partner on board, and what the syndicate is, and thinking about where the next step might be, thinking long term. I think with the exits, one thing to be very aware of is once you feel that the company is now entering the phase where it will be looking for an exit, whether that's because your investors want or because you feel that the corporate, the commercial environment is becoming tougher, so longer term, you'd be better off having it in the next 2 or 3 years. It's sort of preparing for that, and I always suggest that finding the right type of a corporate finance advisor, typically a boutique that has great track record of selling companies in that space, very early on, so 2-3 years, informal, so that they are the ones talking to the corporate acquisition people on your behalf without being recruited by you, so that they can say, oh, well, have you heard of this company, that sort of thing. The other thing is, companies are bought, not sold. It's kind of thinking about what are those hooks that you have in commercial relationships with your key likely acquirers that will move them from being a happy supplier and focusing on building the global ecosystem together to becoming an acquirer. And that's sometimes quite difficult. But the other thing to be aware of is that once you get that first sign of interest and a party that says, well, let's have some strategic discussions, they are the one who is way ahead of everybody else. So your job is to then, if you want to have a competitive process, and it's an if, it's not a certainty, but if you're maximizing value, it typically helps. Your job is then slowing down the first discussion and accelerating discussions with everybody else who are going to be coming from a much colder perspective. And the very common mistake is going too far with the first interest. And then, a lot of the larger players especially are buying companies day in and day out. People on the corporate development side are the ones that know how to do that job, and their job is to buy your company. Sometimes they're remunerated at the cost of it, right? So they have lots of tricks that they can throw in at you, and one of it is by pushing the speed of the process, so that you actually end up in a one-party conversation before you know it. So that's probably the last point that I'll make on that.
I can't believe we have just 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you a 1-minute kind of conclusion, maybe focus on a piece of advice you'd like to give to your peers. Max, you want to start? Is it something that you want to start? Yeah.
Again, peers as VCs or peers as entrepreneurs. I'd like to see myself on both sides, but. To the entrepreneurs, M&A and corporate partnerships is a part of building companies, and it's worth to be scientific about it and learning what works and what doesn't, and what the failures are, because it's not don't reinvent the wheel. A lot of these lessons have already been established in the ecosystem, and it's easier to avoid these mistakes and then correct the things that come with them.
Thank you. Karim?
Cool. So perhaps I'll put my AI researcher hat for a second here, and I mean, we discussed financial, we discussed intent for the company. Perhaps something on the how. This is an extraordinarily exciting moment in history. AI is happening, and being an entrepreneur and founding a startup in 2025 is extremely different from when I started 10 years ago. And perhaps that's the advice I want to share with the audience and would be entrepreneurs or people who already have their company and getting started. AI today is not just a tool. Think about it as a source of very talented digital colleagues. So what I mean is that you could have, with a team of very talented 5-10 employees, highly motivated, expert in their area, you could have the productivity with AI agents, literally like digital colleagues that you're interacting, sending emails to, interacting with, solving problems, writing code together. You could have the productivity of a classic team that's like 300, 400 people. And I mean it, like the order of magnitude of the effect is literally in the order of 100x. And so if you're just starting or you have a small team, you have a tremendous advantage compared to larger players. Larger players cannot pivot so quickly. And the world is moving very quickly. I actually believe artificial general intelligence will happen later this year. We're very close to it. And by that we mean that AI systems will have cognitive capabilities as good as a very talented colleague in your startup, like very concretely, you know, like without getting crazy. And so this means that if you have a small startup, a very flexible one, or you're just starting, architecture your company this way, and you're going to have a massive head start versus everybody else. Or said differently, the complete microstructure of companies, I believe, is going to fundamentally change, and this moment is unique in history. This will play out over this year, the next, and the one after, the next 3 years. And so that's my advice. You have a fantastic wave to go and build and create value for you and for your communities thanks to AI, and this is really like exceptional opportunity.
Thank you, Karim. Last words, Matt?
Yeah, and then really quick, my advice. Whether it's a collaboration or an exit, it's just a point on the journey. So to the entrepreneurs out there who are solving these massive problems that we have, think of it just as a part of the journey, and think about longevity. So we've talked a lot about money. I think people wrap up the exit as a money thing. It's really the investor thing. But you as the founder and entrepreneurial team, also think about longevity and factor that in when you're doing your exit discussions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the three of you. Thank you to the audience. I hope you enjoyed this point of your journey at the Global Summit. It's now done for this stage. See you tomorrow, hopefully. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.